Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in a minute after folks have had a chance to get logged in. Welcome, folks. We'll get started in just a minute. Just want to give another few seconds while folks are logging in. All right, well, why don't we get started, everybody? Welcome. So glad you're joining us this evening. My name is Mimi Enright, and I'm the program manager with the UC Master Gardener program. Welcome to our workshop tonight on summer landscape maintenance in the defensible space, which is being presented by the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. And this is a webinar format. Your video and mic are inactive in this structure of a Zoom meeting. The meeting is being recorded. We will share a link after the workshop is completed, probably within about a week's time. So you can revisit the video, and we'll also include the PowerPoint slides for your reference. And we ask that you place any questions in the Q&A box, the question and answer box, not in the chat. It gives us one easy central location to manage all of the questions that you ask during the presentation. We're going to start out with the presentation and then do Q&A at the end of the workshop. So Jen, could we have the next slide, please? So this workshop is being put on by the Resilient Landscapes Coalition. This is a partnership that we developed several years ago between Sonoma Ecology Center, Habitat Corridor Project, the UC Master Gardener program of Sonoma County, and Fire Safe Sonoma. We do this in partnership with the County of Sonoma Fire Prevention Division and our local CAL FIRE and local fire departments. And our work has been funded by the County of Sonoma through the vegetation management funds. And if you've been to some of our previous workshops have been focused on design considerations and creating a sustainable and fire-wise landscape in your defensible space zone, your 0 to 100 foot defensible space zone around your structures. We stress that it's incredibly important that you're focused on design and maintenance considerations. And this is our first in a series of 3 workshops on maintenance considerations to develop a fire-wise and sustainable landscape. So very excited to have you joining us for this inaugural presentation. We will be focusing on maintenance considerations for this time period, this season in summer and early summer. And we'll have follow-on workshops later this year for fall maintenance considerations with a focus on that, and then winter maintenance considerations. Next slide, please. So I would like to start out by introducing our presenter of our workshop this evening, which is Jennifer Roberts. And Jen is an environmental educator with the University of California Cooperative Extension in Sonoma County. She is also a landscape designer, a Sonoma County Master Gardener, a Master Composter, and a California naturalist. Shows she's got really wonderful experience and training in many disciplines. And when she's not teaching or in the garden, she can be found styling or selling vintage clothing. And very pleased to have Jen presenting this workshop for us. And I will turn it over to Jen.
All right, thank you, Mimi. All right, good evening, everybody. And thanks for joining us. So today we are going to talk about maintenance in the defensible space. And we're going to start out with what is defensible space. Mimi mentioned it briefly, but we'll dive in deeper on that. And we'll talk about maintenance practices that we do in the defensible space, each zone. And then we'll talk in more detail about maintenance practices for overall plant health in the summertime that we're heading into very heavily already today. And we're going to look at pruning, mowing, mulching, irrigation, and composting. And then we'll have a few notes about sustainable landscape management practices related to energy, soil, water, and habitat. And I'll share some resources that we have for you, and we'll head into questions. So one of the most important big picture things that we talk about is making sure that we have the right plant in the right place. So for example, this picture on the left, you can see this tree was planted incredibly close to this house. And this brings up, a variety of problems, but one of the big ones is that this tree doesn't get to grow properly. It doesn't get to expand to its greatest potential. And you can see it's leaning a bit. So we can assume that it's not as healthy. It's not, upright with a good balance. And so when we're planting gardens, designing gardens, or deciding to change them up, we always want to be thinking about, do we have the right plant in the right place? Because proper maintenance of our outdoor landscape is super important for the reduction of our fire hazard. And if we have good design, it allows for us to do easy maintenance in our gardens. So this slide shows what's called the fire behavior triangle, or the wildfire triangle. There are 3 ingredients that get put together that make a wildfire event. So the first one is weather. And this is the wind, the temperature, the humidity, and amount of precipitation that has been received in an area. The second is topography, and that's the slope or aspect of the land, how it, grades. And the last aspect is fuel. So the amount of fuel, the arrangement, and the moisture level of that fuel. And of these 3 things, the one thing that we can control is fuel. So that's why we're here today, to talk about the fuel load within our landscapes around our homes. So there are 3 different ways that structures can become inflamed. The first one is embers. And here we have a picture here. So in a wildfire event, embers are being blown around, they're landing everywhere in the landscape, and this is a great concern for our fire hazard. The second one is radiant heat. So structures can become inflamed from a structure next to it being on fire, and that heat is so great that the next structure becomes inflamed. And the last one is direct flame. So a wall of fire coming towards structures that engulfs them. But the number one risk in a wildfire event is embers. Might be surprising, but embers cause the majority of structure fires during wildfire events. So that's what we need to be most concerned about when we're thinking about maintenance within our gardens. So the first step in the way we think about this is we want to harden our home and then work outwards into the landscape. So in this presentation, I'm not going to touch on much on hardening the home. There are other wonderful workshops that you can do to learn more about that, but we're going to focus on the landscape. But know that's the second part in the process. So what is defensible space? This is the area around your home from 0 to 100 feet. So this is the space we're concerned about protecting ourselves from a wildfire event. And defensible space is split into 3 zones. The first one is called Zone 0, and that's 0 feet to 5 feet out from the home or any related structures. And we call that the ember defense zone. The next zone is called Zone 1, and that's 5 feet to 30 feet out from structures. We call this the lean, clean, and green zone. And the last zone is Zone 2, which is 30 feet to 100 feet outwards from the home and structures. And that's called the reduced fuel zone. So taking a closer look at these different zones, Zone 0, or the ember defense, the area closest to the home and structures. And when I say structures, that's including fences, decks, outbuildings, anything else coming off from the home or any other structures that might be on your land. And in this area, we want to have minimal plants and minimal combustible materials and non-organic mulch. So mulch that was not once alive, as you see here. And don't worry, we'll talk more about that in detail. In zone 1, the 5 to 30 foot zone, the lean clean green zone, we have groupings of plants separated by non-combustible pathways or materials. So you can see this here too. We have a grouping of plants separated by non-combustible material. And this can also include irrigated native grasses. And then zone 2, the reduced fuel zone, coming 30 to 100 feet out, we can have larger groupings of plants and larger groupings of trees and more trees overall. So first steps when you're considering maintenance for defensible space, you want to assess your personal risk. So if you live in a very high fire zone, that high risk zone, you might be more diligent on these maintenance practices. You might be doing these more often. You know, everybody's risk is different. It's important to think that each home and each landscape is unique. We do have to consider individuality. There's no just blank picture that we can give to every single property in Sonoma County, right? We have 3 different climate zones here. And then within each climate zone, we have many microclimates. So everybody's dealing with slightly different aspects to this. But today we're presenting a big picture that can help you get started and dive more deeply into this work. So first thing we recommend is take a walk around your property. Observe your garden. And it's a great idea to do this seasonally. Take a look at which plants are really thriving. What plants might be struggling? You know, do we have pollinators in our garden? Do we have actively nesting birds? Do we have space that we could, you know, do better in, or et cetera? So get to know your property a little bit better. And from there, you'll be able to determine your maintenance needs. And in talking about this kind of maintenance work or redesigning for defensible space, we are not recommending a moonscape, meaning we're not recommending you tear everything out you have and put in rocks, and that's it. We're not recommending you come in and remove large established trees. We can still have beautiful, colorful, diverse landscapes and still be well observing defensible space. So in the summer, the weather is hot and dry here in California, and plants are doing little to no growth. And towards the end, they are heading into seed production. But we still have plenty of things in bloom. Desert plants, California goldenrod, California fuchsias, yarrows, buckwheat. Flowers continue on through summer, and we're very lucky that way. So a little bit more about maintenance specifics by each defensible space zone. So again, next to the house or structures with minimal plants, we want to make sure we're removing weeds and debris from this zone, including underneath decks. We also want to remove clutter, firewood, trash cans, and flammable materials. Make sure that your gutters and your roof are clear of debris. And this is an ongoing practice. We also want to ensure that any plants that we do possibly have in that 0 to 5 foot space are adequately irrigated and definitely being pruned and thinned properly and regularly. And we will talk about that. Then heading further out from the home, 5 feet to 30 feet, we still want to be making sure that plants are well hydrated and free of accumulated debris like leaves and branches. And we want to prune plants for horizontal and vertical spacing. So taking into consideration spacing between groups of plants, spacing between plants in the home, and spacing between in the horizontal way and in the vertical way. We want to remove or mow any dead grass or weeds. and maintain organic mulch. So in this area, we can use a mulch that was once alive, the most common one being arbor mulch, wood chips, we say. So we can use organic mulch here and have that no more than 2 to 3 inches deep. In the last zone, zone 2, 30 to 100 feet, we want to maintain plants like zone 1, so keeping them hydrated and pruned, but larger groupings of plants are increasingly appropriate the further we get from the home. We want to make sure we're collecting fallen branches and debris, and we can combine these to create habitat if we have an open space. And also, again, mowing or removing dead grasses and weeds. Now, zone 3, this is a new zone that I didn't talk about before, but if you have a larger property and you have space beyond 100 feet from your structures, we call this the surrounding wildlands. This is still an area of our property we need to be mindful of and take care of. And the way we can do that is learning how to recognize native and invasive species. And it's a good idea to not modify the vegetation in these wildlands without expert help. You can seek advice from a restoration or forestry professional or fire officials. And you might recognize some of these plants or all of them. But depending where we live in Sonoma County, it's a really great idea to start with knowing what grows here naturally and what could be invasive and more of a fire threat. So let's talk more about maintenance practices for overall plant health. These are all important, and the goal is to keep the plants in our surrounding landscapes healthy, because healthy plants are less susceptible to be inflamed. Well hydrated, well pruned, and well mowed areas do better in wildfire. So we're going to talk about pruning, mowing, irrigation, mulching, and composting. Okay, pruning. So pruning is both an art and a science. You think of bonsai as being one of the most artful and most studied types of pruning, but all types of pruning are important. And so there is technique to it and there is science behind it. We prune plants for vigor, health, and safety. So health of the plant, health of the landscape, and safety for us, animals, and the landscape. And we always want to be maintaining integrity and balance of any plant we're pruning. So we want to make sure it's even and we're not taking too much away that can put it in stress. We start out by pruning out anything that's dead, dying, or diseased, and then also anything that's crossing. So we want to make sure that things are not too dense within the area or the bowl of the plant or trees. But the way to start is with dead, dying, or diseased. And we always want to work with clean and sharp cutting tools. When we prune something, we are creating a wound within a plant. And if we have unclean tools that maybe were used previously on a diseased plant, we could be introducing that disease to the next plant. So we want to make sure we clean. And we want sharp tools because we want to make a sharp, good cut. We don't want to cause tearing, which even if we didn't have disease on our tool, we could be introducing that through the air or water events. So clean and sharp. And when we prune, we want to go slow, step back, look at the plant for its overall shape, and always be asking, why am I making this cut? Where will this put the plant? So take your time. Pruning for fire safety. So again, thinking always about vertical and horizontal spacing. Again, remove diseased or dead plant parts, and you can do that any time of the year. And we want to remove anything dense, dry, or twiggy. So if you see here, this plant is dormant and it does have quite a lot of extra growth at the top and it has dead seed pods. So if you come in, clean up some of the growth, and taking out the dead seed pods, you have a much cleaner and open plant. And this is good when considering embers, because more openness has less area for embers to fall. We do want to avoid shearing plants, just coming in with a shearer. A lot of common landscape bushes are treated that way, where we shear the outside, it looks nice and green, but on the inside, we are creating a dead and woody space. And this is where embers, if they fall, can ignite very quickly. We also want to be thinking about maintaining that distance of 5 feet between vegetation and our structures. This is an important topic, eliminating fuel laddering. So if you think about having plants on the ground that are close to trees, if they do light on fire and those flames are high, they could get into the tree canopy, and then we have a bigger problem than just having a ground fire. So we recommend limbing trees to be 6 feet from the ground and with just ground below it. But if you have bushes, then limbing up 3 times the height of the bush. So if you had a 1-foot bush, you want to limb this up 3 feet to make sure you don't have that fuel laddering. Here is examples of a fuel laddering potential in the real world. So here we have this juniper that has grown up and around this tree trunk. So if there were flames in this could potentially light the canopy on fire. So it's a good idea to come in, clear this away from the trunk, and now you have better clearance. So you have a safer situation here. And we're not ripping out the entire bush, we're just taking it back and making it safer. And then this is a great visual to show what the inside of woody plants, what can happen. So it looks really lush and alive outside, but inside we could have a lot of wood and a lot of dead leaves. So clearing that out is very important. We also want to eliminate vines from trees or on structures, because this can also be a fuel laddering potential. Also thinking about pruning spacing, fire travels faster uphill. So we want to maintain spacing between groups of plants or groups of trees differently on slopes situations. So if we have flat situations, there's one set of criteria, but if an area has more slope, we recommend something different. So spacing increases on steeper slopes, and clusters of trees should be 10 feet apart on less than 20% slope and should be 20 feet apart on more than 20% slope. Pruning shrubs. Now, there's some different things to consider if you're pruning herbaceous perennials, which are non-woody plants that die back and come back each year, and shrubby material that can get very woody, similar to that juniper I showed. So either way, we want to make sure we're removing dense, dry, twiggy material, anything diseased or dead, and shaping is best done after plants flower. So coming in and removing spent flowers afterwards, because we're often growing them for the flowers, for the pollinators, etc. And you want to cut back woody material every 2 to 3 years to help reduce that old woody growth from happening. And we want to keep plants 2 times the height of the plant away from a tree trunk. So if you have a plant coming to that tree trunk, like we saw in the fuel laddering, you want to keep it 2 times the height of the plant away from the trunk. Now let's talk about pruning trees. So timing is important for pruning trees, and we prune for vigor and growth. And it depends on what kind of tree we're talking about and what our end goal is. So for example, fruit trees are pruned in the dormant season. Most of them are. So in the winter, and we're doing that to promote good fruit set for the next year or to promote growth. And evergreens are best pruned in early spring or midsummer. So different trees require different timing, and it depends on what we're trying to do, promote growth or cut back growth. So at the end, I have some resources about pruning. So you can look up your specific trees or shrubs. And trees can overhang a roof, but a clearance of at least 6 feet is recommended if you're not going to be doing regular leaf litter removal. So we see this roof covered in leaf litter. If you're not going to be able to get up there regularly, especially as we head into the fire season, then it's suggested to limb this up more. But again, you don't have to come in and take out mature trees just because of their proximity to your home. But maintaining leaf litter year-round is essential. Here is one of the best techniques for pruning trees. We want to do selective pruning and thinning. We don't want to come in and take all the top of it off, but we want to come in and selectively choose branches that would give it that open look, or taking off some of the lower branches so we have more clearance from the ground. And even with shrubs, it can be beneficial to what we say limb up or take off those lower limbs, even with a shrub, to kind of give it more of a tree form. And then again, that selective pruning from within the canopy. We do not recommend topping trees. So coming in and lopping off the top, or cutting all the top from, the few leaders of a tree. This pushes this spindly, weak growth, and this can attract pests. They are attracted to weak growth, and therefore we can get damage, disease, and the tree starts to suffer. So we do not recommend this. It's not healthy, and we recommend thinning instead. Remember, maintaining that integrity and balance of our plants. A few more notes on pruning trees. We do recommend consulting a licensed arborist as needed, especially if we're talking about very large trees. And we never recommend pruning trees that are near electric lines. Do not take that on yourself. Other recommendations: removing lower limbs to 6 feet from the ground, or if trees are over 30 feet, 1/3 of the height. So taking those low limbs. Avoid field ladders by keeping distance from lower plants to the tree canopy, 3 times the height. And county code requires at least 10 feet distance from branches and any chimneys or stovepipes. Now we've talked big picture pruning, so I'm going to come back and talk about some of the other smaller techniques that are very handy to know. So deadheading is where you're coming in and taking off any spent blooms. So dead blooms and leaving what's still alive. And doing this can encourage a rebloom. It can keep your plants blooming longer, have a longer season. And penstemon and monkey flower are just 2 examples that really benefit from active deadheading. It is a good idea, though, to leave some deadheads for reseeding and wildlife. And again, this thinning technique, very important, coming in and selectively choosing branches to take off. Other techniques you might hear about or practice is cutting back hard. So that's where you're leaving some of this bottom stem here, and you're promoting more new growth. So some of our natives do benefit from this type of pruning, including epilobium or California fuchsia, muhlenbergia, and baccharis or coyote brush. Coppicing is a similar technique, but it's probably one of the most rarely used. And this is where you're really cutting it off low, and it will promote new growth. One of the plants I've seen it most helpful in is coyote brush, because it grows back incredibly quickly, and you have that beautiful lush growth, and you're getting rid of that woody dense material that could have started to happen. And even smaller, getting more detailed here, the way we actually make a cut with our pruning tool is above a bud. So bud is where the new growth is going to happen. So we don't want to cut that off. And we want to cut to a lateral branch. So avoid cutting at a branch collar. That's where a branch is coming out of a tree. We don't want to cut into this little space that's here. We want to preserve that. And we want to make sure we're not leaving a lot of stub here. This can promote death if we leave too much, or it could resprout weak growth and not grow from this stronger bud. And in almost all cases, dressing a wound is not necessary. In the summer, a lot of our natives are best pruned at this time. So here we have manzanita, toyon, and ceanothus. And so this is their time, or a little bit later after flowering, for pruning. And many perennials and semi-evergreen species like sages should be deadheaded throughout the summer and into the fall. Okay, now we're going to talk about mowing. So we only want to use a mower before 10 a.m. during dry weather, and not at all if it's windy or excessively hot and dry, like on red flag warning days. We don't want to let a hot engine ignite dry grass. And it's a good idea to have a water supply or a fire extinguisher close at hand. And if we're mowing in spring, we recommend surveying the ground for birds and avoid areas where they're nesting. So walk around first and then come back with your tools if you don't see any nests. It's really important to stay ahead of weeds. Our goal is to prevent seed formation. So we don't want any of these guys popping up, because all it takes is just one little seed to create a whole other plant, and the cycle keeps going. So it's important to get rid of these. We want to remove invasive and high-risk plants. And we want to mow or trim grass and weeds to 4 inches in the spring and summer, and we can do 6 inches next to roadways. But it's really important to keep on this. And I know it's hard. It takes a lot of work in certain areas to stay ahead, but it's really important. If you have a lawn, you can leave the grass clippings on the lawn as mulch. You don't have to contain the material, bag it up, drag it somewhere else. You can leave it on. And this is called grass cycling. And this provides nutrients to the soil. It also helps retain all the moisture that is in those spent blades and keeps green waste out of the landfill, which hopefully we're not putting any green waste in the landfill. A string trimmer presents less risk than a mower with gas. And consider electric machines, no spark. Now we're going to talk about mulching. So anything that covers the soil can be a mulch. And we have organic mulch and inorganic mulch. And that's related, when I say that, I mean, was it once alive or not? So examples of mulches are wood chips, which we also call arbor mulch, stones, gravel, straw, coconut fiber, leaf litter, grass trimmings, and compost can all be a mulch. And mulch has many benefits, including water conservation, preventing soil compaction, prevents erosion, reduces dust, suppresses weeds, visually enhances our landscapes, and can potentially cool the soil depending on the type of mulch. Organic mulches, ones that were once alive, include wood chips, straw, and leaf litter, and they have the added benefit of improving our soil tilth and feeding soil life. So when they break down, they feed the soil. In the 0 to 5 foot zone, which is closest to structures, we want to make sure that we're using non-combustible, non-organic material as mulch. So stone, gravel, brick, pavers, concrete. There's so many opportunities for this, and they can be really neat designs. As an example, you could use 2 inches of base rock compacted really well with 1 to 2 inches of 3/4 inch pebble on top. When we talk about mulching, one of the most commonly used types of mulch is arbor mulch or composted wood chips. So same term or different terms for the same thing. So the mulch we recommend should have been composted for at least 6 weeks. And the University of California did a test about 8 types of mulch in 2008, and they found that arbor mulch produced very little flame and had the slowest rate of fire spread. So mulch that we're applying should be 2 to 3 inches deep, larger pieces, not super, super fine stuff, and it will have a low burn rate, but it might smolder. So that's why we don't recommend putting it in the 0 to 5 foot zone, but 5 and outwards, it is okay. The type of mulch we do not want to have, though, is anything super fine or anything shredded, like redwood or cedar. It's also called gorilla hair or angel hair. And this is a picture of when embers land on it, it starts to burn. So we don't recommend this. We also do not recommend shredded rubber or pine needles. They have the highest hazardous combustion characteristics, so they are not recommended. But arbor mulch, the wood chips, are acceptable in the 5 to 30, but it's a good idea to break up large areas with other types of materials, which can be visually very cool. Another type of mulch is leaf litter. It's natural, it falls, and it's important for the plants that are dropping it. It provides nutrients and it protects and feeds the soil because it breaks down over the seasons. So in summer, we could have a lot of leaf litter, and that's the time to remove that leaf litter and compost it. But again, like I said, it's important for nutrients. So you really want to assess your risk. We don't want this in the 0 to 5. In the 5 to 30, if it's a high risk day, we might consider cleaning that up. But if it's not, it depends on your specific situation. Irrigated native grass is another thing we can use in the 0 to 5, and definitely in the 5 to 30 foot zone. It has to be well hydrated, mowed, so maintained, but it is an attractive option. In summer, specifically, we want to make sure we're replenishing any gravel or non-flammable material that we've used in the 0 to 5 zone, and arbor mulch in the next zone, the 5 to 30 zone. They might have to be renewed up to a depth of 2 to 3 inches. And the reason why we want that depth is to retain the moisture in the soil. And we want to be taking out weeds from both zones. Okay, let's talk irrigation. So proper irrigation will keep your plants hydrated and less flammable. But we also want to avoid excess watering. Of course, we want to be conserving water, especially right now, we're still in a drought. And we also don't want to overwater because that can promote excessive growth of plants. So then we're required to do more maintenance, get in there and thinning, pruning, and it's just more removal of material. So we don't need to stimulate extra growth. And excess watering can kill plants as well. So it's a fine balance. But you can do it. And the way to do that is to get to know your irrigation system, how to turn it on and off, how to set it, and how to make changes seasonally. Plants need far less water in January, generally speaking, than they do in July. So we can't just program it once and walk away. We still have to be an active participant with our irrigation system. And it's also a good idea to learn how to spot leaks, not just seeing a pool of water or a space that doesn't dry up, but also using your other senses. Hearing can sometimes be tip you off that there's a leak somewhere. And there is technology now that allows adjusted irrigation based on the soil moisture and weather conditions. So that does exist. You don't have to rely on just yourself having the time to go check everything. So it is important to know your plants in your landscape and to be able to determine their thirstiness. Now, this is going to change based on a lot of different factors, including sun exposure, the slope of the land, how much wind you get every day, what species of plant we're talking about, what season it is, and how mature the plant is. So is this a well-matured plant or is this a new install? But luckily, we have help with determining all of this. There is a tool. It's called WUCLS, or the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. And it classifies all plants in the type of water use they need. Are they high water use, moderate, low, or very low? So this is a very handy site to visit, and you can look up plants you have and it can help determine how much irrigation they need. So natives, California native plants, which we do promote, are adapted to our summer dry climate. So they've already been here and they can handle the drought or the non-watering that happens in the summer. But newly planted natives need more water, and they take 1 to 3 years to establish. So if you are putting in new natives, you really should be checking weekly in that first year, but especially in the summer to see if they need supplemental water. And natives enjoy deep yet infrequent watering. Many natives drink in the winter. So if we have a dry winter, it's really good to check the soil, and you can use a moisture meter, easy check, and then water accordingly. For irrigation, we have a couple choices. You can do drip irrigation or low pressure sprinklers, but whatever you choose, it's important to keep emitters away from stems of plants. You don't want them to be consistently hitting plant material. That could cause rot or bring in disease. And when you're placing irrigation, you always want to be thinking about a plant's root zone. So not just right where the roots are now, but as the plant grows, so does its root zone. And you want the roots to be striving for water and getting larger. So thinking about that, put a little more planning when you put in plants. We like to apply the slow it, spread it, sink it philosophy to water. So when we do have rain events, we want that water to be slowed from moving across our property, spread out, and then sunk in. We want water infiltration during rain, because if we have water stored in our soil, we need less irrigation. So the way we encourage water to stay is creating swales, keeping permeable surfaces. So these are, pave or stone, but they have these small spaces where water can infiltrate. Or just thinking about, we don't want to pave our entire property or area, having more permeable surface. Using mulch on top of bare soil helps protect it, so all that water doesn't get evaporated as quickly. And also adding compost to our soil. Compost has the ability to hold 3 times its weight in water. Speaking of composting, it is now the law. So what that means, after the 1st of this year, we as citizens of California can no longer throw away anything that was once alive. So we have to be composting our food scraps and yard debris. And we can definitely use our curbside green bin to do that. That counts, that's great. But you can also start a backyard compost pile or worm bin, which we call vermicomposting. And compost has numerous benefits, but one of the most commonly talked about is it provides nutrients for your garden, for your plants. It also helps retain water and improves the soil tilth. So the workability of that soil, which every gardener wants good tilth. It's also an opportunity to keep organic matter on our property. We don't need to be necessarily putting it in a bin and having it taken away. We can use those resources. And a compost pile can be added to all year round and also cured or left to cook, so to speak. But in relation to fire concerns, we want to make sure we're keeping piles or bins away from structures and keep them properly hydrated and turned. You do have to turn compost with some kind of tool to allow oxygen to get inside so it can do the work. And once it's finished, you can spread compost year round, but the best time is in the fall, right before the rains. Now, we do promote native plants, so do be careful because some natives do not like compost. They don't need that extra nutrition. They are adapted to California's naturally less nutritious soils. Now, some special precautions during high risk time or red flag warning days. So we want to make sure that we're taking away any objects within 5 feet of the home that are movable. So those things that we place around our home or structures to, enjoy ourselves, like deck furniture, potted plants, welcome mats, tools, and trash cans. If we're in a high risk time, we want to be pulling those away from the structures. And we also want to take a look at our 5 foot to 30 foot zone to assure we don't have accumulated debris like leaves or branches, dry plant material, etc. We want to make sure we give plants an extra soak to make sure they're hydrated. And we don't want to be mowing or using gas-powered tools of any kind at this time. A few more notes about sustainable landscape management. So we always want to be conserving water. It's going just to become more and more important in California. So we want to only have lawns where they'll be used. We're not here to vilify all lawns everywhere, but just be considering, do I use it? Do my pets use it? Do my grandkids use it? So just make sure it's used. And we want to be watering at night or in the early morning, not in the height of the heat of the day, and not if it's raining. We want to avoid overhead irrigation near hardscaping. Don't want to see waste. And using plants from a Mediterranean climate or California natives is your best bet for conserving water. Not only do we want to conserve water, but we want to protect water. So capturing water on your property with swales or rain basins or rain gardens allows it to sink, go into the groundwater, and once it's in the ground, it gets filtered. If we have the rainwater rushing over hard surfaces and directly into storm drains and directly into our creeks and rivers, it doesn't have the same filtration process if it goes quickly. And we also don't want to be using harsh fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides, because when we do have rain, they accumulate and they're washed off directly into storm drains without any treatment. So what we do put here ends up here. We also want to think about conserving energy. We want to reduce motorized tools and equipment. And we do not recommend using leaf blowers, or at least very seldomly, because these loosen topsoil and mulch, and they can be a fire hazard unto themselves. We also want to think about utilizing local materials, local rocks, soil, and compost, etc. Choose local when you can. Also, soil is very important. We want to build our soil, because when we do that, we actually have the opportunities to sequester carbon. So we hear about carbon dioxide being in our atmosphere. This is causing climate change, but plants are incredible and they are taking in carbon dioxide and they have the ability to put it back into the soil through their roots. So if we support our plants to be healthy and use compost to help them even make deeper roots, we can trap more carbon within our soil. So therefore, we're helping reverse climate change. And planting trees. We hear it all the time, but it truly is a way to capture carbon and shade homes, which reduces our need for cooling. And I love this fact. In 1 year, a mature tree will absorb more than 48 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and release oxygen in exchange. Trees have numerous benefits to us. We also want to consider habitat, providing habitat for pollinators and wildlife. So learning a bit more about the interactions between birds and insects and other wildlife in our native ecosystem. And we can do that by planting more California natives and by providing a water source within your garden. So on a day like today, all those pollinators and birds are looking for a drink. So you can have a bird feeder or something as simple as a dish of water with a few pebbles. And this is a great activity to do with children. And just another tip, if you're thinking about choosing a landscape maintenance professional, you can go ahead and ask them about their Firewise knowledge or training and ask about their familiarity with California native plants. And if they don't have familiarity in either of those areas, you can provide them with written materials or our website to help guide them. And as a team, this group, the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, is working on trainings for landscape professionals, so you can guide them to us. All right, here are a couple more resources. This is our website, SonomaResilientLandscapes.com. You can also go to the Master Gardener's website for tons of resources. Here's that WUCL's link, the water use that I mentioned, and the California Native Plant Society has a tremendous database about all native plants. And here are some of my sources. And this will be sent to you. So if you miss any links or anything, you will get them. And that's all I have for tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
If we could get our panelists to turn their videos back on and unmute, we'll open it up for some questions that have been entered into the Q&A. Please feel free to add in any more questions. We did just have a question, someone asking about where can I access previous presentations related to design rather than maintenance. I did put our YouTube page link, which has got recordings of our past presentations, but you can also go to Resilient Landscape Coalition, our webpage. There's a great resources page with lots of links to past PowerPoints and to articles and content we've developed in our work over the last couple of years. So I wanted to start by introducing the panel. So we've got a full representation of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition tonight for our workshop. Jennifer Roberts and I are with the UC Master Gardener Program of Sonoma County. Ellie Inslee and John Carnegie are representing Sonoma Ecology Center. April Owens is the executive director of the Habitat Corridor Project, which is a native plant advocacy nonprofit here in Sonoma County. And very proud and grateful for our partnership and relationship with Roberta McIntyre representing Fire Safe Sonoma for us tonight. So you have an esteemed panel here to answer any questions you might have. And I'm going to start off. Jen, one of the first questions when you were talking about pruning, you mentioned shearing. And Susan can't quite picture what shearing is about. And I don't think we had any pictures of any sheared shrubs, but do you want to take that one and we can open it up to the rest of the group as well?
Yeah, sure. Shearing is generally done with like a big blade, like a mechanical one, and it's just like, you know, the side of a plant. It can be very destructive. But yeah, it just can create, you know, deep cuts and it's quick. But there are places where shearing can be good too with some of our natives, like epilobium. So it's a careful balance, but it's these woody plants that get that dead inside that we don't want to be shearing.
Yeah, so when we talk about shearing, it's classically used on evergreen shrubs, and you see a lot of landscape maintenance companies, organizations do it. When you see a bald evergreen shrub or a boxed evergreen shrub, that's been sheared. And what that does is it then develops, causes that woody shrub to develop a lot of dead plant debris in the interior of that shrub. And that buildup of that dead plant debris, which is kind of hard to remove from this sheared, boxed, or bald evergreen shrub, makes it more flammable. So we'll have to include a picture of a sheared shrub in our next
And I
presentation.
just want to say that shearing is shearing is the best operation only for California native grasses like deer grass and California fescue in the winter. So it is a way to, I've been against shearing for a long time, but it's a good way in December, January to cut back California native grasses.
Yeah, so great comment. So normally it's not just in a negative context, though it is often done in that way with a lot of landscape maintenance that's done. I mean, we should pick plant materials and for their natural shape and form, which can be so beautiful, rather than exerting man's control over them and boxing them into some shape. It's often done because a plant's been selected that's too big for the place that we've picked it. So Jen talked about how important right plant, right place is, and that's certainly an aspect of that. But there's a positive aspect. We do shear back grasses to regenerate for fresh new growth in the late winter, as April referred to. So it can have a positive aspect as well.
Just for using a synonym, like shearing could be considered hedging, and but in the case we're using it with native grasses, you would call it mowing. But the thing that she described is that it's a cutter, that vibrates as you go along, and it cuts the tips off of things when it's hedging.
Okay, next question, which I know will be popular with our panelists. Is there any area in the yard to let plants go to seed? I have observed that birds enjoy eating seeds of spent plants. Anyone want to start in on plants and seeds and the importance of food for our native wildlife?
I can say a few things. Yeah, I think there's certainly opportunity to leave some, and that, what you think of is just not letting all of your landscape, go to seed. You can still leave some for birds and other animals. And I am a very avid plant propagator, and so I like to leave at least some flowers, spent flowers, to see if I can collect seed and grow them. You think about the risk that you have looking at your community, the house, what it's built of, things like that, in assessing how much you can allow to go to seed and how close to the house, because certainly you have more opportunity to leave more things after bloom a little bit farther from the house than you would want to do maybe 5 to 10 feet away. Some thoughts.
Okay, next question is, how flammable is sawdust used as a mulch? Oh, do you have an opinion on that, Roberta?
I know. So first off, technically, by definition, sawdust is not a flammable material. It's technically a combustible material, and sawdust is more combustible, or much easier to ignite than wood chips. And a wood chip is easier to ignite than a log. And it all has to do with what's called the state of subdivision of the material. So the smaller a piece of combustible material is, the more surface area there is relative to itself and the area around it. So then the more surface area you have as a ratio to the available oxygen, the easier it is to ignite and combust. So yeah, it's not as bad as wood chips, but I mean, it's worse than wood chips, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I would equate it to, so the recommendation from, I haven't seen any research studies, specifically the scientific study that Jen referred to that was done by the University of Nevada at Reno and the University of California. Though I think there are some new studies that are going to be coming out, which I'm very excited to see, didn't test materials down to that granular or small of a scale or size, but the recommendation is for larger chip sizes as it's being less flammable. And that's certainly, Roberta did a great job describing that.
I'm actually a woodworker and I do a lot of woodwork using pine. And so I end up with a lot of pine sawdust, which you guys tell me if I'm wrong, but pine, as long as I'm not, mixing it with plywood and things like that, that have glues and other materials in the product. I think that's a good product for composting. Um, can
Yeah, do
anybody?
you know that? Do you know about sawdust and composting?
Yeah, it's used. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah, but I'm imagine you want to use just the sawdust, pure sawdust from
Yes,
like oak wood, pine
right,
wood, and not plywoods or particle board, things
right.
like
You don't want to be introducing glues and polymers to your compost and then going out and putting it on your garden, especially a vegetable garden. So,
yeah, I don't, it's bad enough to breathe the stuff, you don't want to eat it.
right.
Since it's organic, I wonder, and if you're not composting at home, I suspect you'd be able to put it in your green bin. Do you know, Jen?
I
I
don't
do.
think we want-
Oh, fantastic. So if you've got that as an excess material, if you're a woodworker and you're not composting at home, then
Yeah,
sounds like it's an acceptable addition to the green bin, which is really great.
if I have clean scraps, you don't want to put, they don't like it, and I think it's a bad idea to put like the plywood and things like that in the green bin. But if
Yep.
it's just solid wood, I put a lot of scrap wood in there from projects that I built.
Nice, excellent. Next question. Some sages bloom early in the season and then get very dry. When do you recommend pinching the spent blooms or cutting down low to the ground? Is this a two-step process? Do you want to take that one, either John or April or Ellie?
So my philosophy is to let the seed heads go to, they get the flower heads go to seed and then cut them back when the things cool down, because it feels like plants don't like to be cut back when it's super hot. So that's my, I like to cut back sages and in the fall, and after the birds have gotten to enjoy all that seed. John?
No? Any additions, John?
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. I'm not I'm not real quick to deadhead, and so often it is fall that I would get around to it. And then if it's the type of plant that benefits from being cut down lower than just deadheading, then that would happen more likely in the winter, December to February.
Okay, so hard cutbacks on salvias or sages suggested in the winter time. Is that the
Mhm.
recommendation?
If we get some rain, whenever we get rain.
Thank you. Esther asks, do you recommend removing potted plants from zone 0 on high fire risk days? Yes. If you're in the 0 to 5 foot zone and it's organic and embers fall on it, it could ignite. Certainly there's lesser degrees, especially if it's a woody plant, for sure. It would be removing it out of the 0 to 5 foot zone. But definitely on red flag warning days or high fire risk days, yeah, the suggestion is that we move those potted plants away from that 0 to 5 foot zone. Any other comments or additions?
Sure. Potted plants are pretty heavy. So I know it may have been you, Roberta, who has said you can put them on rollers.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on what's in them. And as others have said, it depends on how flammable the adjacent, your home is. And if you have a concrete block house or a hardy board house, then it's not as important. And if it's like beaver tail cactus, so you have to really think about what all the nuances are of what you've got.
Great.
I think that's a great comment you had, Ellie. Like, as we've been doing walkthroughs, like it depends on your home, like as well, in the 0 to 5. Like if you are a hardy boarded home and you're in your fire resistant landscape, your home is hardened, it's a different situation, right, Roberta?
Yeah, you have to also pay attention to the relationship to windows and openings as well. Even if you have a concrete block house, if there's a window there where you've got a combustible material right in front of it, that can be problematic. But yeah, so every scenario is different, and it's all about reducing risk.
Yeah. So for example, I'm in a very high fire severity zone in northeast of Cloverdale, directly abutting wildland urban interface, the WUI is within 30 feet of my home, the back of my home. I used to have a lot of really large potted plants around my house, and I moved them all away. And I have some small ones that I then will move out on a red flag warning day. So I'm in a very high fire severity risk zone, and I know that I want to be minimizing my risk during a potential fire event. So that is that whole personal assessment of your own risk and balancing how you want to manage that, especially in your 0 to 5 foot zone, which is really critical. Okay, the next question. Oh, yes, Ellie.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something that we might not come up in a question, but there may have been something a little confusing about what we were saying about trees overhanging the roof and limbs and what to do with them. It's absolutely critical to keep any tree that's anywhere near your home in the, at least within the 30 feet, well pruned, all dead limbs removed. And we do recommend limbing all trees up 6 feet. It's not required by the county or the state, but we recommend it. And definitely it's the law that it has to be 10 feet from a chimney. And we really do recommend keeping leaves out of your roof and gutter at all times. And as it's Steve Quarles says, it's fine to have a tree near or overhanging your house, but you have to work for it. So it really is important to keep your gutters clean and anything and all dead branches trimmed away.
That's perfect, Ellie. That's the next question I was going to queue up for the group with what to do with mature trees in the 0 to 5 foot zone. So that was perfectly timed.
I knew it was in there somewhere. I just didn't know.
Yeah. So Steve Quarles that Ellie mentioned is a retired University of California researcher who then went to work with the Insurance Business and Home Safety Institute and did extensive wildfire research. He's a really eminent, well-known researcher on this topic of wildfire. That's a perfectly framed context for considerations for mature trees in the 0 to 5 foot zone. So we're not advocating for removal. Ellie kind of took you through considerations. In my high fire severity risk zone, and probably within 10 feet of my house, I have a very large mature oak tree that drops leaf litter year round. And that means, that tree is a treasure, and oak trees are one of the most important species for supporting wildlife. But that means I have to work for it. I'm constantly removing leaf litter year round from my 0 to 5 foot zone. I'll minimize it during fire season, the leaf litter that can get pretty deep in my 5 to 30 foot zone, and I'll reduce that to just a couple of inches during fire season. But for sure you want to, it's probably easier, reduces your maintenance, as Ellie said, to limb them up 6 feet over the roof, or if you're not, you've got to be super vigilant about that ongoing maintenance. So it's just about supporting it. Jen did a great job talking about what important ecosystem services trees provide for us in our environment, in our landscapes. And but we've got to learn to maintain appropriately to keep them in that zone. Yep, Ellie.
One more note for anybody who has a tree, definitely if it's close to your home, have an arborist look at it, because we can tell you all these generalities, but it's important to know how healthy your tree is. And an arborist is really the only person that can say. So if you have an unhealthy tree, if the root system is a problem, there's a lot more issues than fire that you may be contending with. So definitely pay attention to it for all.
Please make sure they're a certified arborist. It's really important to know that the people that look at your trees are trained and not just tree services.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. What about coconut coir and flammability? And I have not seen any research studies that included coconut coir. Does anybody have any experience? I think it has kind of if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't it have a characteristic more like gorilla hair where it's more fibrous?
Yep, absolutely.
I don't know.
I just looked up I've never heard of that material, so I just researched it real quick since I saw that question. And like I said, I don't know anything about this product, but I just pulled up the material data safety sheet for it. And the material data safety sheet says regarding flammable properties, this product is not flammable, no unusual fire explosion hazards, but it doesn't mean it's not that it's non-combustible. But like I said, I don't know that much about it. So that's about all I can say about it.
I've used it a lot in erosion control, and I love it. There's different thicknesses of coir. Some, I would say that, kind of like Roberta was talking about the surface area ratio to oxygen and so on. You can get some pretty dense stuff that's almost like carpet, that's awesome for erosion control, especially along stream banks. But you can also get the finer stuff, which I think would be more combustible. And so you just have to kind of use what Roberta said about how to judge explain the difference between flammability and combustibility, because it's actually really, I do understand that from a fire professional standpoint, you have to differentiate. So Roberta, I was going to actually ask.
Well, I'd have to knock the cobwebs out of my head for the old fire science classes, but it has to do with the boiling point of it, or vapor point of the product, and ignition temperature. So those two things are relative to determining whether a material is combustible or flammable.
Okay.
Thank you, Roberta. Next question, please explain that painted wood chip mulch is not safe for the soil. It may be made from chopped up pellets, plywood, or treated wood. The chemicals can get into the soil and kill soil organisms or washed to creeks during rain. And Jen spoke to that a little bit, that, we don't want to be introducing pesticides or herbicides or any chemicals perhaps that are referred to specifically with treated wood. I don't have any real depth of experience with what's comprised in painted wood chip mulch. Does anybody else on the panel?
Not experience per se, but I've heard the same thing that this participant is writing about. I did do a quick search online, seeing this question coming up, and yeah, a lot of people have these concerns, and they seem viable concerns. Apparently, there are products that are kind of certified to not be, treated with. That would be, definitely something that we would want to avoid. That are, they're claiming that they're high quality wood, but they're not really getting around what it's dyed with and what that material is. But that would concern me around soil health issues.
Yeah, and then the other part of that too is Santa Rosa Fire Department post the fires up in Fountain Grove anecdotally discovered that the red wood chips, and I think it's part of a advertising ploy. If you go buy red wood chips, you might think you're getting redwood chips. But regardless, if you put those red bark chips down in place of others, apparently their experience, Santa Rosa Fire Department's post-fire, is that the red wood chips really were terrible to the degree I think they're talking about banning them outright.
Oh, wow.
Apparently, I know Paul Lowenthal said that they burned much faster, and it's all anecdotal, as Roberta said. I've also heard that the painted ones are often cedar chips, and they're just painted with, not water-based paint. And obviously, if it's not going to wash away, they've had to put some kind of chemical in it. But yeah, so we don't know enough to be clear about that. But what we recommend is using arbor mulch, which is it's like a term that's you go to any of the local landscape materials stores and they'll know what you're talking about.
And what I've heard, I'm sorry to jump in, and Jen probably will be, so I just learned that dyed, like the black, like mulch is actually not like an organic dye. However, those kind of mulches, again, are like cedar mulch. They're like any of the mulches that don't add to the soil, whereas arbor mulch and compostable arbor mulch and compost actually feed the soil and hold water. And so getting away from those is the best way we can help our soil. I don't know about fire because there aren't a lot of studies in that space.
Okay, next question. How flammable is lava rock if used for landscaping?
Roberta.
Cool. It's not flammable at all.
It's-
Cool at all. As long as it's cooled down after leaving the volcano.
After it's left the volcano, it's.
Well, I mean, it's, yeah, I don't think it can be defined as flammable for sure. And certainly I would also think it wouldn't be described as combustible either.
Yeah.
But we don't
We're
don't
trying to get people to have habitat in their landscape. So it would be nice if you use that to get some plants in there that actually have habitat as well.
I know
That's
it's,
maybe just considered in 0 to 5.
I know lava rock is hard on your bare feet.
That's for sure.
And
That's for sure.
I mean, and you know, we're sort of laughing about this, but a lot of people are taking out their lawns. And I do know that there's an article from the Index Tribune in Sonoma back in February, which really caught my attention, where the city of Sonoma paid this homeowner to remove their lawn and replace it with lava rock. And the article actually said, yeah, you know, in fact, the environmental benefits, because you're not using as much water, but you are providing no habitat and you're heating up the landscape, because anything leafy, vegetative actually cools the landscape, where you put lava rock in and you're heating things up. And there's virtually no habitat value that I know of whatsoever.
Next question. If a large green shrub has been sheared for 8+ years and its interior is all dense, dry, and woody, can the plant be saved, or does it need to be removed and replaced? Well, I would say, first of all, you want to think about what zone it's in. For sure, remove it if it's in your 0 to 5 foot zone. I don't know that you can rejuvenate a shrub that's been consistently sheared and has developed all that dense woody interior. Does anybody else have any experience in that? I'm not sure you could rejuvenate. You could try coppicing it. That practice that Jen referred to, if it's a shrub that will rejuvenate from the
There are some plants some shrubs that will come back incredibly, like toyon and oleander, which is a non-native plant that can be cut back. So there's some plants can be coppiced pretty severely. Jennifer, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, some can take it, some don't. So yeah, I would just, what is the plant? How special is it to you? Is it beautiful and providing, you know, something else, not just a plant in the landscape? Then I would consider starting with something better. Get a native.
Great response. Any other comments on? Yeah, Ellie.
I just there's a fellow named Chris Grabil, who is I think maybe the new educator at Santa Rosa JC, who put something in the chat about Santa Rosa will pay for native plantings and lawn removal. It's called the Cash for Grass program at the Santa Rosa Water Agency. So definitely check that out. Thank you, Chris, and welcome.
Okay, next question, which I think is from Bill Kenny. He wants a comment on redwood trees, watering, thinning, and needles. Anyone want to tackle redwood trees recommendations?
I'll make some comments about redwood trees. It's distressing to me to see so many of them suffering these past couple of years. You know, redwood trees are best adapted to the fog belt. They make great landscape plants, but they do depend on water. And I've seen lots of places where they've been planted and probably irrigated if needed to get them going. But once they got large, they're not receiving irrigation anymore. And now that we're in some droughty conditions, it's been really, really hard on them. A lot of trees are dying. So if you must have a redwood tree, or you have an existing redwood tree and want to keep it happy and healthy, then I think irrigation's got to be part of that. And remember, you know, a big tree, the irrigation needs to be well out from the trunk, you know, more out at the drip line of the tree, not, you know, don't put a drip emitter at the trunk of a 24-inch trunk redwood tree. Redwoods do drop a lot of stuff. I have a very large one in my backyard, and they have a brittle wood. If you're a woodworker, you know that too. It's easily split and breaks. So you tend to get a lot of debris underneath, and so that would need to be cleaned up if your roof is underneath, and obviously that's extremely important to keep cleaned up. So there's a few thoughts to start the conversation.
Naturally,
Ellie, yep.
I also have a cluster of redwood trees and some other, I've, a large property with a lot of trees that were planted 30 years ago. And I also have a friend with a redwood tree in Glen Ellen, which is a pretty dry area. So she put I don't know if she had a spray system. I'm planning on putting a soaker hose around the drip line of my redwood tree and giving it some supplemental water. So I suggest, maybe making a ring with a soaker hose as an example, if you don't already have an irrigation system, and you can just, put a regular hose and hook it up.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I live under redwood trees, and I just don't think you should have a white car under a redwood tree because they drop a lot of berries. So just as a warning, but I'm in Sebastopol, and they need a lot of extra water because they're used to the fog belt. So even in Sebastopol, which is way further from Glen Ellen, they are not getting the fog that they need anymore, which used to be 2 inches a day, and now it's changed. So redwoods need a lot more water, and I hope people aren't planting them any further inland than Sebastopol at this point.
Yeah, they're adapted to coastal California where they get regular fog as a water source.
Yeah.
And Ellie, you mentioned drip line, and there's a question where someone asked, can you explain what the drip line of a plant is? That's a really great question.
Well, and it's for redwoods in the fog, what they do is they collect water on their needles and they drip the water down. I mean, you can, I used to bicycle a lot and under redwoods. And so I'm not answering the question right now, but on a summer morning, you would get rained on if you went under the redwood trees. So the drip line is actually the outer edge of the canopy. And I don't know why they call it the drip line. Maybe when you go outside of it and it's drizzling, you get dripped on, but when you're inside, it's the leaves are, I don't know, somebody might know that answer. But I mean, I think with the redwood tree, I probably will water somewhat inside and somewhat outside of the outer edge, the drip line of the trees. I'd love to hear what anybody else has to say.
Yeah, the drip line is just where the drip comes off the tree.
The tree canopy perimeter.
Yeah. So it's just like an oak, like it's just literally where the water comes off.
And typically canopy. The root structure is as big, if not bigger, than the canopy. Absolutely. So that's why they refer to looking at the canopy, because that identifies at least how big your root zone is, and that's where you want to be getting water. And Chris Grable had raised his hand. I don't know, Chris, did you have some other comments you wanted to share on this topic? I enabled it so you could chat if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I think that was my 10-month-old son, but I just wanted to say thank you.
Nice to see you, Chris.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to say thank you, and I would really appreciate connecting with folks after this to help develop our curriculum. So thank you.
We'll be in touch. All right.
Just to kind of, while I have you, the curriculum in the fall is going to be a wildfire resilience and worker safety curriculum in coordination with a few nonprofits, including Jobs with Justice, and it'll be around this material, but also making sure it's fully bilingually accessible, and we'll be doing some field and site visits, and hopefully in the future expanding cohorts and really doing a lot of this work, because I know it's so urgently needed. So thank you.
And that's for landscape maintenance professionals, right, Chris?
It's designed for existing landscape workers, but it doesn't have to be, it's not a requirement. So
that's great, Chris.
Yeah. And then from there it'll expand.
Go back to sorry.
Go ahead.
Just go back to the question of if you're going to irrigate a tree like a redwood tree. What I was saying, and I'd like to hear what other people would recommend, is if you were using a soaker hose, would you put it slightly inside, maybe, depending on how big the canopy is, somewhat inside the edge of the canopy and somewhat outside the edge of the canopy? John, because you brought that up.
Yeah, no, just in the area of the drip line, that outer perimeter of the canopy of the tree, just in that general zone, it can be somewhat in and somewhat out or both.
Right.
Would be the best place to irrigate a mature tree.
Okay, Lana, we've got about 5 minutes left and we've got at least 4 more questions to try to get through. A couple questions that relate to oak trees again. One who says they live in Santa Rosa, our neighbor has mature oak trees right next to our back fence in the 5 to 30 foot zone that drops leaves and acorns. How do I encourage them to trim the trees? And then another about, should I leave native oak leaves under oak trees and what kind of mulch? Well, let's start with that and then we'll tackle the next one after that. So folks want to make comments about oak tree litter?
I know one of the things that, because we've talked about this a lot, and the general rule is obviously keep it outside of the 5 feet, that all leaves. But because the leaves have nutrients that the root system needs to keep the tree healthy, it's actually a good idea to leave some oak leaves within the drip line of the tree and even outside, because we know that especially oaks, the roots go way out, the surface roots in particular. So what we end up saying is that it can be considered a mulch in the the 5 to 30 zone, but minimize it. So maybe an inch during fire season, but in the wintertime when it's raining, because now you have to add when it's raining, it's totally fine. And that's when the nutrients are being transferred down into the root system. So it's actually a good idea to leave the oak leaves on the soil when it's raining and it's wet. So obviously, hopefully it's not raining.
So I would say what we're all promoting is also, and we're seeing a lot of happening with COPE groups, all these wonderful neighborhood groups coming together for fire preparedness, neighborhood fire preparedness, is to talk to your neighbor about fire preparedness and share your concerns. And if you feel like there's some trimming that's needed to remove some dead materials, to talk about that. But that litter drop is, as Ellie talked about, really important, providing a really important ecological function for the health of the tree. You want to assess your own personal risk. Are you in a very high fire severity zone? You might want to reduce it a little bit during high fire season. But we have to find ways to, I think, accommodate and work with each other as we move forward.
And encourage them to clean and keep the tree healthy.
Yeah.
Basically, what you don't want to do is cut off half of the tree, because you're going to, as Jen talked about, you'll have an unbalanced tree, which is actually going to be more fire hazardous. So you want to trim the tree carefully, because it's not just the neighbor's tree. The neighbor needs to understand that it's actually the community tree. So I think that, encourage them to be more, think communally.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to what kind of mulch would be best if in high fire risk on a hill. And I want to go quickly to what about pruning woody lavender? How far down? Jen, do you want to talk about lavender, pruning lavender?
I think you guys might have a little more experience.
Sure. So basically you don't want to cut to bare wood on lavender. You want to cut to where there's still some green material of the leaves, because if you cut to the bare wood, it doesn't regenerate. So you've got to, it's a gentle balance in pruning lavender with how far down to prune. And then do you have to have 6 foot clearance from the ground? Yes, that is the recommendation to reduce transmitting fire from, if there's fire is on the ground plane, from the fire moving up into the tree canopy. And do you have to remove ground debris in 5 to 30? So I guess that's kind of there's a lot of aspects to consider in that. Ground debris could be that oak litter that we just talked about. If it's dead branches, you probably want to be removing any dead branches in ground debris. Roberta, anything else you'd add on that specific topic?
Yeah, if it's outside the 5, your risk will be much reduced. But again, you have to ask yourself, how important is this for me to have in my landscape? And some, islands of material could be okay, as long as it's separated by totally non-combustible areas. We've seen some pretty creative landscapes out there where they juxtapose different things to, using some combustible materials to still make it safe by creating islands and spaces between and things like that. But really, it just comes down to reducing that risk, and balancing that degree of risk with what, what still makes you feel good as a person living in your particular environment.
I just
And
want
then-
to speak really quickly to
Yep.
that lavender comment. Like some plants need to be replaced every 5 years. So it's not just cutting them back. It's like lavender needs to be replaced every 5 years or
And
less.
it's
There
it's-
are plants that need to be completely replaced.
And it's a great example of a plant that starts out as herbaceous or non-woody and becomes very woody over time, unless you're really adept at maintaining it. But even with that, it becomes very
Yeah.
woody. So it's a great example of something that starts out looking good from a, a non-woody perspective and fire risk, but becomes very woody and has a short lifespan of like 5 to 7
Think about
years.
the lifespan of your plants.
So there's
Absolutely.
lots of great alternatives, land native plant alternatives.
Lots
to
of
think about.
native alternatives.
Lots of native options. So the last question, and we're at time, but I'd love to try to tackle it quickly if we could. What kind of mulch would be best if in high fire risk on a hill? Anyone want to take a stab? Roberta, do you want to take a stab at that?
Well, how close to the building are we, and what's the degree of slope? Because the steeper the slope, the higher the risk, particularly with combustible material. And the closer to the house you get with that material, the higher the risk. So that's a tough one to answer, just without knowing the particulars of that actual site.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
I-
related to the structure.
Yeah, I'm in a high fire severity risk zone. I have a steep slope right, in the 5 to 30 below my cottage. And I'm exploring plant cover, perennial plants as a mulch. Plant cover can actually serve as a mulch and help retain water under the plants are providing that protection from the sun, and reduce weeds. I mean, I have crazy weeds on the slope, and it's part of a defense for me not having to climb that slope and weed. But that's something to explore as well, that we can look at alternatives to what we might consider as mulch.
Married to that is erosion control. If you're talking
Yep.
about slope, you've got to have something.
Yep, because they build the root structure that holds the soil in place. So we're just past time. Want to thank everybody for joining us and participating. We will be sending a follow-up email with a survey. We hope you'll participate and give us feedback on this so we can improve for our next workshops. Watch for more from us on our workshop series for both design and maintenance over the rest of this year. And thank you to our panelists and to Jen. And we hope to see you at a future event. All right, bye, everybody.
Nice job, Jen. Nice job, group.
Yeah, nice job.
Yeah.
Thank you all.